Went to Chester and said, Chester, will you start our series, our storytelling series? And he was so gracious and agreed to do so. I thank all of you for coming in this evening. I'm going to ask you that once you leave, that you inform everybody else that Bastrop County Historical Society is featuring a storytelling session on the first Friday of Art Walk, on the first Friday Art Walk, okay?
Sure.
Now, I heard earlier that Chester had fallen off of a horse and wasn't going to be able to make it.
Well,
is that true, Chester?
well, I did bring my cane, but as the gentleman with the walking stick can tell you, this does not support weight well. The horse is fine. My knee is not. April Fool. No, I did something stupid, probably too much dancing when I was younger. Swimming is supposed to be the perfect exercise, and I did that a lot. And when I came back from New York, I was really in good shape. And then all of a sudden came to Bastrop and began to spread just a little bit. And it turns out that I'm barely fitting in my special digs tonight. But I was going to do for you just some different types of things with storytelling. Of course, stories are so vast in what they cover. There's stories all around you. You can read them, they're right here. And then you can imagine other stories based on what you see here in the museum. It's the same kind of thing that I tell the children when they come to our classes. You have your imagination, and that allows you to create. You can improvise, or you can write a script and become a playwright or a screenwriter and do a lot with your storytelling. So I was going to start this evening with something that I found. I'd forgotten about this, but I wanted to read it to you because I think it's really kind of important. As you get to the end of this short little episode or excerpt, there's a word that really signifies, I think, what we're talking about when we're doing storytelling. This is from Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. It's the 5th chapter, condensed, mucho condensed. But this was used in a sermon that the pastor in Austin at Faith United Methodist asked me to develop something from this particular chapter, and this is what I came up with. She caught the shawl as she spoke and looked for the owner. In another moment, the White Queen came running wildly through the wood, with both arms stretched out wide, as if she were flying, and Alice very civilly went to meet her with the shawl. "I'm very glad I happened to be in the way," Alice said, as she helped the White Queen put on her shawl again. The White Queen only looked at her in helpless, frightened sort of way, and kept repeating something in a whisper to herself that sounded like bread and butter, bread and butter. "Come, you look rather better now," Alice said, "but really you should have a lady's maid." "I'm sure I'll take you with pleasure," said the Queen. "2 pence a week and jam every other day." Alice couldn't help but laughing as she said, "I don't want you to hire me, and I don't care for jam." "It's very good jam," said the Queen. "Well, I don't want any today at any rate." "Oh, you couldn't have it if you wanted it," said the Queen. "The rule is jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today." By this time, it was getting light. "The crow must have flown, I think," said Alice. "I'm so glad it's gone. I thought it was the night coming on." "I wish I could manage to be glad," the Queen said. "Only I never can remember the rule. You must be very happy living in this wood and being glad whenever you like." "Only it is so very lonely here," Alice said in a melancholy voice. And the thought of her loneliness caused 2 large tears to come rolling down her cheeks. "Oh, don't go on like that," cried the White Queen, wringing her hands in despair. "Consider what a great gal you are. Consider what a long way you've come today. Consider what o'clock it is. Consider anything, but just don't cry." Alice could not help laughing at this, even in the midst of her tears. "Can you keep from crying by considering things?" she asked. "Oh, that's the way it's done," said the White Queen with great decision. Nobody can do two things at once, you know. Let's consider your age to begin with. How old are you?" "I'm 7.5 exactly." "Oh, that's not necessary. You don't need to say exactly," the Queen remarked. "I can believe it without that. Now, I'll give you something to believe. I'm just 101, 5 months, and a day." "I can't believe that," said Alice. "Can't you?" the Queen said in a pitying tone. "Try again. Draw a large breath in and shut your eyes." Alice laughed. "There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe in impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." "Whoa, there goes the shawl again." A sudden breeze had picked up the Queen's shawl and blew it across a little brook. The Queen spread her arms wide and flew after it. The reason I brought that in is because of the words impossible things. Now, in storytelling, quite often we're dealing with impossible things, whether we believe them or not. It doesn't really matter. And if you're making up a story, or if you're telling a story, or if you're living a story, it could be an impossible thing. I'm going to start with something now that I don't know if you'll even believe it or not. It doesn't really matter to me. The most important thing is, I know that what I'm going to tell you is true. How do I know? I lived it. And it was an impossible thing. When I was directing at the Opera House in the late 1960s, we had been working on a show, and a lot of volunteers were around, and of course, after the show, we worked on costumes and sets and lights and various things for the show, because it was opening very shortly. So one of the things that happened was that as the volunteers got more tired of being in the Opera House, I felt like I really had to work more and more and get more done. So eventually, I wound up being the only person left in the building that was working on the show. Well, alone, I felt kind of lost. So I began to see, it's getting late, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe I'd better shut down the Bastrop Opera House, that old historic building at 711 Spring, and go on home. I lived at Pecan and Buttonwood in Ms. Herndon's guest house, which happened to be the pool house. So as I was going about my duties to close the theater, I made sure that the stage doors were padlocked. I went up on the stage and I turned off all of the stage lights, and it was necessary for us to throw the breakers, cut them off, and then for the stage lights, take 3 large locking cables and undo each cable and let the pieces hang to the side. Then I went out into the theater and I decided to go ahead and turn off the lobby lights and the restroom lights and the concession stand lights, pack up my things, and walk home. I enjoyed walking home in Bastrop, whether I lived on Main Street or Pecan Street, or even over on Cedar. It was really nice to be out in the community. At 2:30 in the morning, sure, only stray dogs were a problem. So as I was walking back to Pecan and Buttonwood, I began to think about what I needed to do the next day, and I thought, it's going to be a very short nap really, because I can't stay at the house. I have to get up and meet people the next day at the Opera House. So I jumped in bed and about 3 hours sleep, maybe 4 hours, got up the next morning, took care of all the necessary things, got dressed to go to the Opera House. Went in by unlocking the front door, didn't turn on any lights because it was already about 9 o'clock in the morning. So I moved in, going past the concession stand, and as you enter the Opera House theater room, you have an opening on the right and the left, so you can take your choice. I usually like to go drifting over to the right. So I started going over to the right, got over just in the place where the arch was, and stood for a second and thought, that cannot be happening. On the stage, diagonally opposite from where I was, there was a glow. It was kind of amber in color. And I thought, that could be a candle, but there's no candle on the stage. How can there be light, that little pool of light, on the stage? So I began to think, well, logically, we didn't have the drapes over the windows at that time. We just had those old pull-down shades. And I thought, well, the eastern exposure, the sun could be hitting somebody's chrome on their car, and it could be coming through the crack between the window facing and the shade, and then no, that doesn't make sense. The stage is too high. There's no way that that could be reflecting off of someone's car. So then I thought, well, just go on down, walk on down to the stage, and see if there's something there. There was a small pool of amber light. So I looked up, and on one of the pipes in the theater, there was one instrument, and the instrument had an amber gel, which covers the open area for the light to come through, and you can put any colored gel in there that you want. Otherwise, it's just pure white light. So that explained the amber gel, the amber color. But how is that light on? This couldn't be logically explained, since I was the last one to leave the building. So I said, well, maybe somebody came in and they did something in the building and connected those stage lights again and just forgot to turn off all the stage lights and disconnect the main power to those stage lights from the outside. So I walked up on the stage, the stairs to go up, and I went to the back and I looked at the breakers, which were off, and I looked at the cables, which were unplugged. Then I stepped out from around the proscenium arch, the picture frame, to look at the pool of light, and it was gone. I looked at the light. It wasn't on. So then I started trying to think, how is this possible? It isn't. It's an impossible thing that has happened. But I remembered when the Opera House was built in 1889, it had no electricity and no plumbing. And I thought, whatever walks here in the night doesn't like electricity. And you're laughing at that impossible thing, but there is something that walks there. And I can tell you that very quickly in a shorter story, because two very dear friends of mine, very, very strong Baptists in the community, were helping to put together some hors d'oeuvres for the next evening's event. So they were doing some prep in the concession stand. They had the keys, the front door they locked, the back door was padlocked with a chain and padlock, and the upstairs is a push bar, and nobody can come in from outside. So Kay's mother said, after whacking some celery, Kay, somebody's in this building. Kay said, Mother, There's no one in this building. We're secure. Don't worry about it. Let's just keep going. So they kept working. Then a little bit later, her mother said, Kay. And Kay said, yes. There's somebody in the theater. Mother, please, let's just do the radishes and go home. So they were still working. And finally, her mother said, would you please just go with me so that we can see if somebody is in the theater? It sounds like they're walking on the stage. All right, Mother, shall I take the knife? Might be a good idea. No, Mother, I'm not taking the knife. So they go out of the concession stand and move in. They have to reach inside the light booth to turn on the overhead lights, and they did. There wasn't anybody there. So they closed down everything and went back to finish up what they were doing. And then Kay said, Mother, I think I hear somebody walking on the stage. And her mother said, is it a man or is it a woman? And Kay said, I think it's somebody in boots, but it could be a woman in stacked heels. So at this point in the Opera House, we have not seen a ghost. The kids always come for history lessons, and the last question invariably is there an Opera House ghost? And I try to stall because I know that sometimes it's politically incorrect to say that there are evil spirits running around and boogie-wah and all this. So I just said, well, there's an energy here. This is an old building. It's an old building. It's got creaks and groans and moans. So I'm not quite sure what it is that's there. But it's never been harmful. It's never done anything improper, except CD players have stopped during performances, or the lights have come on or gone off when they're not supposed to. So I now tell you that I think I was right when I first witnessed that amber glow on the stage. We don't know of any actor that has been killed, murdered, maimed in the Opera House. There was actually a New Jersey actor who was with a company and came and was performing some very interesting nautical maneuvers on the river for two very interested young ladies who were walking along the riverbank. And he fell overboard. And the ladies had to grab a limb that they found under one of the trees and keep prodding it for him to come over because he could not swim. So he didn't lose his life, but there is an energy in the Opera House that probably is very friendly, and it's about time for somebody to say, I saw the ghost. We've heard the energy, whatever it is. I'm pretty much a pragmatist, and I say, it's just an old building, the creaks and the moans and the groans. But other people actually have wanted to do an exorcism in the Opera House. And I said, no, absolutely not. If it's something that belongs here, leave it here. So the Opera House, if you come in, if you see something, just be very calm, and either it will manifest or it will just simply go somewhere else. So those are some points about the Opera House that I thought you might be interested, since you're in an historic setting tonight. And the things that to me are impossible things to you may not be impossible at all. So I hope you'll come and see some shows at the Opera House and realize those are just, thank you, but these are things that if I hadn't lived through the first one that I told you, I couldn't imagine myself lying about it and making it up. There just was no way to explain it. And that's kind of exciting stuff. So, for those of you that are, shall we say, under 21, this is something I'm going to tell for you, but those of you who are here can also participate because it is good exercise and you don't have to leave your chair. This is a really fun story that young people enjoy, and it's usually told around Halloween, but it serves the purpose for what is the moral of the story and how the story ends. There was a little lady, and she lived in a very nice setting out in the woods where she had cleared some land, and she had a wonderful farm. She had a sweet little cottage and a very nice little garden, and she had some chickens and some ducks. But the most important thing to her was the forest, because she liked to go out and forage. She liked to go out and find herbs and to find spices and to find nuts and berries, all these wonderful things that she could put in her basket and bring home. Perhaps she would can them for the winter if they were berries. Perhaps she would just use them for little sweets, all kinds of things. She loved to find occasionally maybe a truffle or two. But she enjoyed going out and foraging. So here it is, a fall evening, about 5 in the evening. But she decides to go out into the woods and see what's in the forest. So she starts down the path with her little basket. She goes down the path and she begins to collect items that she finds. And she spends a little bit too much time doing that. And she looks up and she sees a sliver of a silvery moon over the horizon. And she thought, oh, the moon has come up. I really had best be going home. So she started off down the path. As she turned the corner, she saw 2 large shoes right in the path. And the 2 shoes went clomp, clomp. And the little old lady looked at him and said, I'm not afraid of you. Excuse me, I have to get home. So she went on around the shoes. And as she was walking a little further, she heard, you get to do it too, clomp, clomp. 2 shoes go clomp, clomp. So she went on a little bit further, and she was thinking about what she would make with the fine nuts that she had collected. And then she looked over her shoulder, and by the bushes, there was a pair of pants. And the pair of pants went wiggle, wiggle. And she laughed and said, well, I'm not afraid of you, pair of pants. I'm just going to go on and get home. Oh my. So she started on down the path. And behind her you could hear clomp, clomp from the 2 shoes. The pair of pants go wiggle, wiggle. Then she looked up, and almost as if on cue, there was a shirt floating just in the air. And the shirt went shake, shake. And the little lady said, oh, well, I'm certainly not afraid of you, shirt, so I'm just going to go on home. So she started walking, and behind her you could hear 2 shoes go clomp, clomp, a pair of pants go wiggle, wiggle, a shirt go shake, shake. Well, she decided that she might have to walk a little faster because it was getting darker. So she started going a little bit faster, and the next thing she knew, when she looked ahead of her, she encountered a pair of gloves and a tall black hat. The gloves went, and the hat went nod, nod. She laughed and said, oh, well, I'm not afraid of you, so I'm going to go on home. Thank you very much. And then behind her, you could hear a pair of shoes go clomp, clomp, a pair of pants go wiggle, wiggle, a shirt go shake, shake, a pair of gloves go clap, clap, top hat go nod, nod. Well, this was getting too strange, and frankly, she was a little bit nervous, so she said, I'm going to hurry home. So she hurried as fast as she could, and then up from out of a bush, there popped a large pumpkin head with a nasty face. And it went boo, boo. She said, I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Pumpkinhead. Have a good night, and I'm off. Behind her you could hear 2 shoes go clomp, clomp, a pair of pants go wiggle, wiggle, a shirt go shake, shake, gloves go clap, clap, a top hat go nod, nod, and the Pumpkinhead go boo, boo. Well, by this point she was practically running, but she didn't want to appear afraid. So she was going to get into her yard, slightly fenced, and she didn't even shut the gate. She got up a little closer to the door, opened the door, shut the door. She locked it. Well, it was time for a nice cup of tea, so she set her basket down from the different things she had collected in the woods. Leaving them there, she walked over and she poured some warm water from the kettle, sat down in her rocker, and just began to rock. All the pain and suffering of the days, all the pressures were gone. Knock, knock! She looked around and knew it had come from the door. Should she answer it, she said? Well, I may be a little old lady, but I am not afraid of anything. She unlocked the door, put her hand on the handle, and opened the door. And there were two shoes going clomp, clomp, a pair of pants going wiggle, wiggle, a shirt going shake, shake, a pair of gloves going clap, clap, a top hat going nod, nod, and a pumpkin face going boo, boo. She took a deep breath. She said, "What is it that you want?" "We're here to scare you," said the pumpkin head. "Well, excuse me. I am a little old lady, but I am not afraid of anything." And immediately the pumpkin head's face went sad. "Well then, what are we supposed to do?" "Well, let me think a moment." So she looked at all the assemblage there, and she gestured to the pumpkin head, who came over, and she whispered in its ear, "Oh yes, pumpkin heads have ears, just a little slit on either side." So she leaned over and she went, okay. The pumpkin head's face put the biggest smile you can possibly imagine, and she shut the door very quietly and didn't lock it. And she went to bed and had a very peaceful night. When the rooster crowed the next morning, she got up and she went over to her window and she pulled back the curtain, and there she saw the two shoes that went clomp, clomp, the pants that went wiggle, wiggle, the shirt that went shake, shake, the pair of gloves that went clap, clap, the top hat that went nod, nod, and the pumpkin head went boo, boo. And that is the first scarecrow. I'm sorry, I caught you. I think you were okay. I was trying to watch the kids, but I think that one time there was an immediate, let's eat this chair and run, you know. So it's fun in storytelling because these are stories that you can give a lot of credit to those people who created it, and it's a wonderful children's book. If you have or haven't seen it, it's worth getting for very young children. And they love to do all the little sequencing and the sound effects. There's also an opportunity for you to slightly change the ending. And so the very first scarecrow is something that was created many, many, many centuries ago. But under the circumstances, I always like the story because it's a more gentle way of saying that sometimes you need things to scare away things that might be destroying your garden. So that's the first scarecrow story. Good, thank you. Let's think about this for a moment. I have one that I really would rather not tell it. I would rather read it to you. It's not very long, but there's quite a bit in it that I think you need to be prepared to receive. Are you up for that? The reading of it? I have performed it before, but this is a famous, famous old story. And it's one of those things that can be embellished. Things can be taken and added to it, or taken away from it. Doesn't really matter. It still holds just an awful lot. But I think you need to be aware it's got some great opportunities in it to learn and memorize certain aspects of how the language in it works. It's an old tale. Again, it is something that is preferred maybe on Halloween, but anytime you have a dark night with no moon, it allows you to think about what can happen with impossible things. Once upon a time, in the dark of the moon, a lot of old conjure wives was a-sitting around by the fire and a-cooking a big supper for theirselves. The wind was a-blowing round like it does on dark of the moon nights. And the old conjure wives, they hitched themselves up to the fire and they talked about the spells that they was going to be a-weaving along come midnight. By and by, there came a knocking at the door. "Who's there?" said an old conjure wife. Who? "One who is hungry and cold," said a voice. Then the old conjure wives, they burst out laughing as they called out, "We's a-cooking for ourselves, who'll cook for you." Who? The voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. "Who's that a-knocking at the door?" said another conjure wife. Who? Then there came a whistling, wailing kind of sound. "Let me in, do. I'm cold through and through, and I'm hungry too." Then the old conjure wives burst out laughing again, and they commenced to sing out, "Get along, do. We's a-cooking for ourselves, who'll cook for you." Who, he. The voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. Then the old conjure wives, they went to work a-cooking for themselves, and the voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. And then the old conjure wives, well, they hitched themselves up to the fire, and they ate, and they ate. And the voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. Then they laughed and they called out again, "Get along, do. We's a-cooking for ourselves, who'll cook for you." Who. And the voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. Then the old conjure wives began to get scared like, and one of them said, "Let's give it something and get it away before it spoils our spells." The voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. So then the conjure wife took just the littlest piece of dough and she peed it in the fry pan, about the size of a pea. The voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. Then the dough in the fry pan, it begun to swell. And it swelled, and it swelled out over the fry pan, and it swelled over the top of the stove, and it swelled out onto the floor. And the voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. Then the old conjure wives, they got real scared. And they ran to the door, and the door was shut tight. And the voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. Then the dough, it swelled, and it swelled all over the floor, and it swelled up onto the chairs where the old conjure wives had climbed, and then they had to climb up onto the back of the chairs because they get scared and scared as it began to swell, and they called out, "Who's that a-knocking at the door? Who? Who?" And the voice didn't say nothing, but the knocking just kept on. And the dough kept a-swelling and swelling, and the old conjure wives began to scrooge up, smaller and smaller, and their eyes got bigger and bigger. "Who's that a-knocking? Who? Who?" And then the knocking stopped, and a voice called out, "Fly out the window, do. There's no more house for you." And the old conjure wives, they spread their wings, and they flew out through the windows and out into the woods, and they were calling, "Who cook for you? Who? Who? Who cook for you? Who? Who?" Now, if you go into the woods in the dark of the moon, you'll see the old conjure wife owls. And you'll hear them, "Who cook for you? Who? Who cook for you? Who? Who?" Only if you go out on the dark of the moon and you hang out around those old owls, come midnight, the conjure wives, they change back to being old conjure wives, working their spells. I love to watch when we're doing this, the look on your faces. And it really is great fun. There's a story that, I'm not sure how we're doing on time. Oh, yeah. This one is interesting because it's one from San Antonio. It's called The Lady in the Red Dress. There are a lot of folk tales and stories about situations in Texas. This one is particularly interesting because it occurs in the El Mercado in San Antonio, in the market district. And it's an interesting story because there are people who think that perhaps the lady in the red dress has on a dress that is especially beautiful and very loud and flashy to draw attention to herself. And then others think that the dress is very dark red so that it blends in with the night and you don't know who she is. Well, no one does know who she is because they've never seen her face to face. If they've seen her, they only seen her walking on her night walk by herself. Now, some people at the restaurants, when they're leaving and the restaurant is closing down, those people are very anxious to get home quickly. There are other people that go out in the nightlife and they're not particularly concerned. They've got plenty of protection. They feel very good about themselves. So they don't rush away. And then there's another group. And this group are the young people who have a tendency to hang out on the street corners under the street lamps, and they might smoke a cigarette and the smoke goes up under that street lamp and kind of warns you to stay back. So you don't necessarily want to be around those young people because you just don't know what might happen. Now, the lady in the red dress, she goes where she wants, and she never changes her pace. She walks purposely but leisurely up and down the streets of the El Mercado. Here's what happened one evening. She was on her walk, and a young man behind her said, "Hey, how are you? Like to get to meet you." She didn't turn around. She just kept walking. He became a little more aggressive. He kind of changed his demeanor and delivery a little bit. "Hi, how are you? I would like to get to meet you." She just kept walking, never changed her pace. Then she turned into an alley and went down the alley, and about halfway, where it was really dank and smelled of rotting things, it turned out that the man tried to catch up to her and get in front of her. So he was hurrying along, and he got up, but she never let him pass her. And he said, "I think it's time that I got to see who you really are, mysterious lady." She kept moving just a little bit further and stopped because he reached out and touched her elbow. He did not grab her arm, just touched her elbow. She spun around, and as soon as she turned around, there on her shoulders was a great donkey head. And the donkey head opened its mouth and grabbed his face and ripped his face off, so that all that was left was the skull. Now, the next morning, when a sanitation worker came, he found what was left of the young man next to a dumpster, but no sign of the lady in the red dress. So if you're in the El Mercado district and you see a lady in a red dress, don't follow her. Don't call out to her. And above all, never, ever touch her. This is what a lot of grandmothers tell their grandsons when they visit San Antonio. And it's a very wise grandmother to tell about the lady in the red dress. Cool, thanks. That's one of those stories. It's amazing how it actually goes together, because there's so many stories that when you read them, they've been changed a little bit, and I'm sure you've always heard the one about the hook. I'm not going to tell it tonight, but you know about the hook? Well, there's a version that's much more chilling than the one where the man escaped from prisoner in asylum, and he has a hook for a hand, and it winds up making noise on top of the car and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, the story that is in the version of stories that I have, it's an actual cheerleader who has a hook for a hand, and she's looking for her pom-poms. So there's all kinds of ways that it becomes impossible. Now, Georgina gave me the high sign, and this is something that I wanted to share with you. There is a longer story that I would like to talk to Colin about, maybe putting on the BTXN, because it could use some support behind it in color and texturing. But I'm going to do something for you now that I hope you enjoy. It's a piece that I've known since I was in the 8th grade, which is way back in those impossible days. But it's something that to me means a lot, because it is actually one of the African American pieces that I do. And it means a lot to me because I studied a great deal about James Weldon Johnson, who was a master at taking sermons that he heard as he was growing up and putting them into a format that was usable for sacred and secular purposes. It's just good poetry and great reading. It's also been combined into something now that is called God's Trombones, so that you have not only the sermons, but you also have the spirituals moving between the sermons. And it's a very powerful piece. So I'd like to do this one for you to close tonight. And God stepped out onto space. And he looked around and he said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. As far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. And then God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled upon one side, and the light stood shining on the other. And God said, that's good. Then God reached out, and he took the light in his hands, and he rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun, and he set that sun a-blazing in the heavens. And the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world, and God said, that's good. Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand, and the moon was on his left. The stars were clustered about his head, and the earth was under his feet. And God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. Then he stopped and looked and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes, and the lightnings flashed. He clapped his hands, and the thunders rolled. And the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Then the green grass sprouted, and the little red flowers blossomed. The pine tree pointed his finger to the sky, and the oak spread out her arms. The lakes cuddled down in the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea. And God smiled again, and the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Then God raised his arm, and he waved his hand over the sea and over the land. And he said, bring forth, bring forth. And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls, beasts and birds, swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forests and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, that's good. Then God walked around, and God looked around on all that he had made. He looked at his sun. He looked at his moon. He looked at his little stars. He looked on his world. Oh, with all of its living things. And God said, I'm lonely, lonely still. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think, by a deep, wide river. He sat down, and with his head in his hands, God thought, and he thought, till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the banks of the river he kneeled him down. And there, this great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the farmost corners of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hands. This great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay until he shaped it in his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen. Amen. Thank you. This has a special meaning for me also in Bastrop, just so you'll know, because I've done it at the Veterans Day show in the gazebo several years ago, and I also was invited on Laity Sunday to the Methodist Church here to perform it for them. And I've done it in several other locations, never with pay, but always with great appreciation for the talent that I was given. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Chester for such a delightful evening of storytelling.
Well, thank you.
Far above what I could have imagined. I also want to tell you, well, I want to say to each one of you, thank you for coming out this evening.
Absolutely.
We hope you will come again. We hope you will spread the word. And if you haven't visited the museum as a whole, we're open 10 to 5 every day, on Sundays from 1 to 4. There's no cost to visit, so please come again, and particularly for the moms and dads who brought their little ones. Thank you. I recruited Frances to come in, and I saw her having such a great time.
Yeah, I scared her at one point, I think, by shouting. I'm sorry if I shouted too loudly.
Well, you couldn't say.
No, just thank you. I mean,
Thank
this was
you.
for Georgina. She asked me to do this, and we've just been not enough time together so far, but we're beginning to bond, and this is very important for the community.
It's for the community
It is for the
that he
community.
does this, that he did this evening.
So thank
Tell
you.
everybody. I know it's not 7:30, but I don't think we realize how long he would have to go on. So we are cutting it short this evening till 7 o'clock, but we hope to see you again in the future. Thank you so much.
Well, I have one more that I will give you another time, but you have to really be prepared because it is long.
Thank you. Thank you, Chester.
Thank you.